I move across the border. Well, you know, I haven't been driven across the border now since, well, I don't know, but for probably 6 months, which is the first time in 30 years or something I have spent that long.
Regular.
Oh yeah, I've been across the border 400 or 500 times. Yeah. But certain activities in Mexico have not met with my. I felt that the chances of being murdered were greater than were to my liking.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And I've never done that before, but that now that just having an Arizona license plate is grounds for, I think, being somewhat skittish going down there. So I'll wait a few months and let that blow over or get overturned in court or get worse, whatever it's going to do.
Right. Do you think that this has, I mean, is it backlash? Is it something that could be beneficial? Do you see it as being completely detrimental?
Somebody we talked to said these are boundary objects, that, like the wall, she said. They cause people to rethink and may motivate others to act.
I would like to think that it causes people to rethink and cause others to act. I don't know whether it will or not. I have a suspicion, and I can't confirm it because I haven't even tried, that people who have been familiar with the border, and I mean intimately, in that you know people, you've talked to them of all walks of life and moved back and forth, know immigrant groups in Mexico, know them here, those people will, a strong majority of them will find the law appalling. Just it's very much sort of like studies have shown that people related to gay people have a far greater tolerance. If there's one in the family, for instance, if a person in your family is gay, you will have a far greater chance of not objecting to gay marriage or anything else, and opposing discrimination against gays. I think it's the same sort of thing with the border. Anyone who has really gone across the border and see what the presence of the migra there, which is simply overwhelming. Yet, you can. I recently started in El Paso and filmed with a crew to Yuma. We didn't obviously go the entire distance, but we filmed overlooking El Paso, and then we ran along the border. We filmed at Columbus, Antelope Wells, San Bernardino, Douglas, Naco, Nogales, Sassabee, Lukeville, and Yuma, and drove a fairly good part of that distance wherever a road was available. And the number of Border Patrol vehicles, apparatuses, searchlights is simply astonishing. So how anybody could say that the U.S. isn't even trying, it's willful ignorance. They do not want to. I don't know how the migra themselves, how the Border Patrol feel themselves, because they won't say, and I think they're instructed not to give any position on. I had quite an interesting discussion with a fellow who was trained at Coronado National Memorial as a biologist, and he is now armed, patrolling along. And he says, heck of a note, I can't do what I'm trained to do. I have to do this patrolling here. And it's it's real serious. I don't know what his opinion would be because he won't give it. And most of them, if you take them aside, all they can do is, they tell Obama jokes and they get together. It's a pretty rough bunch. But what they think is the proper thing to do, I don't know. It would be very interesting to see if you could get them off the record to talk. In Mexico, there's no question that it's viewed as another insult toward Mexico, just overwhelmingly. I've seen photographs of a cab in Mexico City with written on the windshield, no se acepta turistas de Arizona, for example. And others giving the finger to Arizona here, showing a saguaro, that sort of thing. Yeah. What the reality is of, if you could get people to say, I don't know, but that overwhelming. There are 14, we counted 14 different wall constructions.
14?
Yeah. In our, starting in El Paso. And so there's certainly more than that, and it's a huge contractual
Is that what
windfall.
you were doing, is sort of looking?
Well, no, we started off doing 2 programs on the Gadsden Purchase.
Uh-huh.
And it was sort of the Gadsden Purchase, what we got, what Mexico got. That was the theme. But it wound up being about 70% on the border itself. Mm-hmm. And one of the finest things on the border, which is just such a trip, and it's I'd like to go back and see it again. Was, Dan Duggan, who's a videographer, and I were over in Yuma, doing something completely different. But I said, let's go down and film the wall around Somerton. So he went down, and here's the wall, and he says, hey, there it is, Dave. So we went over, and we got on an agricultural road, drove over right to it. And of course, it's 20 feet high. Mm-hmm. It's steel, cast iron cylinders full of concrete, 20 feet high. And one interesting thing about it is in the afternoon, you can't walk along that on a sunny day without moving your gaze around, because the effect of moving has with the sun and the shade has a dizzying effect. And we talked to a couple of the Border Patrol guys about it, and they said, yeah. But anyway, that wall, we drove along, and all of a sudden the thing comes to an end. I mean, literally, there's the end of the wall. And you look around the end, there's the Colorado River empty, of course. And there was a fellow leading on a pickup truck in the U.S. I went over and said, well, where's Mexico? And he said, oh, it's right over there. This was in Spanish. He was speaking Spanish. And I said, why does the wall end here? It was really funny. And he pointed to a sign. The sign says, no trespassing, property of the Cocopah Indian Nation. And they have told the U.S. government they may not build a wall there.
Interesting.
So here, I mean, it's ludicrous to see this monumental Great Wall of China just come to an end. Amazing. And of course the Migros now has this super, almost like a highway up on the bank to move back and forth, but there's no wall there now. I don't know what they're going to do about that. Right. That stuff happens in numerous places along.
Now, are they doing that all the way through the Oahu as well? Because I know that was so.
I know it is very controversial, and I think that most of the O'odham Nation is without a wall.
Still, because they had, when all this was approved way back when, that was a huge issue, as you know,
yeah.
But they were also terrified of what was.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're certainly feeling the brunt of a lot of the coyote activity and the garbage that's left behind, which is stupendous.
I gather as part of the agreement to construct the wall, Homeland Security was supposed to give money to the Department of Interior for monitoring environmental stuff.
I've heard that, but I don't know. Yeah, and part of that Oregon Pipe is where we spent a lot of time in Oregon Pipe, because we wanted to film at Quito Baquito, which is historically a very important place. And in order to go out there, we had to have 2 armed guards go with us to film. What they told us, and 2 of the guys who went out, one of them is Tim Tribbett. Tim, anyway, he's been a naturalist ranger there forever.
Tibbetts.
Tim Tibbetts, yeah. You know Tim.
I do.
A wonderful guy.
Yeah.
And he just sort of shrugged his shoulders. He says, it's not very much fun doing biology out there because he has to have, and it's not simply posturing, it's real. But there, the wall is you can easily get across it. It's a vehicle barrier, but it's not a human barrier. And I had a chance to talk for maybe a half hour with one of the guys who was there. We were heavily armed, always looking. And he said that one of their biggest problems there is people running back into Mexico. Because they know they have come up and made a drug drop, and other people are then, they know, with GPS. Their contacts will sit up on top of hills and pinpoint exactly where the Migros is at any given time and use their cell phones. While we were there, a semi-truck came along Highway 2, which is 50 yards from Quito Baquito. And while it's a straight highway, and while we were, Dan and whoever was with us, we were all filming, all of a sudden this big semi comes, and this ranger said, that's a signal. That is a signal. They have the truckers in on it as to whether it's safe and whether it's not safe for them to try to run across. So the nexus in Mexico is astounding. I think that there is probably no extended family in Mexico that is not one way or another involved in narco traffic. It is. I know marvelous families very well, and I also know that somewhere in that family somebody's involved. So anyway, that's the nexus in Mexico, and it's a huge nexus. It's incomprehensible how complicated it is.
Are you seeing impacts to Pinacate and?
I haven't been in Pinacate in 6 years.
How about organ pipes? Someone said it was trash.
Yeah. The area. What they showed us was that the area right near the border is not so bad, but you get back a quarter of a mile in and over the top of the ridge, and it's just trashed everywhere. Yeah. And the more they build the walls, they disperse that population. I have a friend, a Canadian friend, who grew up in Douglas, but is Canadian now and has bought a piece of property about, I would say, probably 10 miles east of Elfrida, up in sort of the foothills of the Swiss Helms. And he never saw anybody. Now, with he's seen more people because they're dispersing him. The guys described to us the ramps that the Mexican makes that are ingenious. So money just seems to have no end there. The amounts, the descriptions of the battles that go on. So there's no question, but that's a war zone. Yeah. Now, what has caused that is, I think historically, I think that is analytically quite possible to look at in a fairly short paragraph.
Do you feel comfortable in kind of putting this current, what everybody I think might agree is a really bad time, in a larger historical context? You've been around this for a long time. We've seen bad times before.
Well, the difference here is that it is more permanent, and there's a permanence in that wall. That there's always been the push-pull effect when economic times get rough. Racism emerges, and we want to kick Mexicans out, and then when times get better, we need their labor, we want them back in. As on back and forth, it happens once every 2 decades or something like that. That hasn't changed. Right now is clearly a time to take out our frustrations on minorities, which we do quite well.
Right.
But I can't see now that this is being reversible, because as the money to be made by getting immigrants goes up and the cost for each immigrant escalates, more and more powerful players are getting involved, and so it's become a huge industry. If you go to Altar right now, it's astonishing. That entire town has grown drastically and is built upon providing services and transportation to the border for hopeful immigrants. Thousands and thousands of them.
What about on the other side of Sassabee? Is that also, because that was exploding 10 years ago when I was here?
I don't know. I haven't been there. We actually, it was kind of neat. We went to Sassabee, and you can drive along the wall. Like, apparently we could 4 months ago. You can't now, but you could cross through the U.S. Customs, reach the cattle guard that goes into Mexico, just before that, turn left and drive out along the wall. And you can look through that and see Sassabee itself. It didn't look to me much different from the way it did 40 years ago when I was crossing there.
Because it was one of the places that was slated to be a larger crossing space because of the autumn lands there.
But when I was crossing there in the late 60s, and I was twice a month, there was a trailer there and a small building. And that was it.
And it's a complex now.
Yeah, and now, there's 20 buildings and heaven knows what kind of communications equipment and dozens of trucks, helicopters, all the paraphernalia. We talk about military spending. This windfall for contractors. The border is simply a bottomless pit of construction projects for the same construction outfits that have screwed up Iraq. I don't know that, but I mean, in order to get one of those contracts, to build a wall, you have to be huge.
Yeah.
And the producers of that equipment, of the monitoring equipment, of all of the very sensitive surveillance stuff, I can't imagine anything, but it's like the munitions industry. They must love this stuff.
Yeah. Well, now you've got a built-in constituency for continuing.
And you bet.
Hard to put that in juxtaposition to these enormous efforts you've made all these many years to promote binational, cultural, and environmental understanding,
Yeah.
It's almost like talking to David Laird about his library.
Oh, yeah.
But you think there's something enduring that's left from all this effort? What is it that you make of this? Not to put it too...
I wrote the book on Sonora, the geography book, in the mid-90s.
Right.
I'm kind of afraid to go back and read it, but I would certainly have a lot to say about the penetration, the complete penetration of Sonoran culture by narco-traficantes.
Okay.
One thing that has happened in Mexico with the so-called crackdown on the major cartels is a gradual expansion of smaller cartels. As the big capos get knocked off, then smaller groups are forming, and they are now moving into formerly legitimate businesses in towns, taking over just as the mob has done elsewhere. And so, while I would say 30 years ago, the narco-traficantes were certainly there, powerful, dealing with cocaine, methamphetamines, all of this stuff. They were sort of an isolated part of Mexican culture. Now, with the money to be made, and since they're a major employer, and young men can get, and a few women can get recruited and make huge amounts of money, that has now penetrated the entirety of Mexican society. And as a result, the entire view of income in Mexico is now very different. Young men don't want to work the type of jobs they used to, because they have now seen how quickly they can make a lot of money working. Now, their lifespan is deeply reduced to probably half. When they go in that, the lifespan is greatly shortened.
That's interesting. One of the things I had said to Helen that was, for me, pretty powerful was when I had started working and banging around the border, there was a young cadre of people who were being educated either in the U.S. or also in institutes in Mexico, and you're beginning to see an environmental service, government service, research service. And I wonder what the impact, are you seeing that is now sort of dissipated in the interest? Because there was such a young, when Samuel Ocaña, and you had this vibrant youth of folks that were coming.
Well, unfortunately, that has disappeared for other political reasons. Now, one problem that Mexico has, and it's a very serious problem, is that they have no reelección. Right, that's the policy. The term of the governor is 6 years. The governor brings in, and when they're all men, I guess there's maybe one female governor somewhere. When they come in, they don't just fill the top echelon, they fill all the jobs. So there is no continuity whatsoever from one administration to another, which makes it impossible for us to find out how do you continue an environmental program in Mexico. And not only is there no continuity, but there is often hostility between the changing regimes. And if there was a program in one regime, when the next one comes in, they want, let's get rid of that. And that's what happened to this Centro Ecológico with under Ocaña. He was there under Beltrones. He was a governor himself. And when then, I guess, López Nogales took over, he said, enough of this crap, no more Centro Ecológico. It became a zoo. And that's all it is now. It's sort of a popular place. There's no real research going on. And similarly, if the Nature Conservancy has this sort of nightmare setting up a problem of more or less protected areas. As soon as one administration changes, they pull the funding out. It's happened around the Sierra de Alamos. that they have no guarantee of any continuity from one governor to another. There is no civil service. And I've spoken about this in public, and I have been chided by a Sonoran academic who says, yeah, but the universities are institutions that do have continuity, which is true, but the university institutions in Mexico tend to be far more academically oriented than ours do. Field work is just not a high priority for Mexican universities. Working with your hands is not viewed as socially.
Why you go to college?
Yeah, you go to college so you don't have to work with your hands. And so doing actual tromping around in the boonies is academic is not, it's just very seldom done.
How about the pinacate? When I talked to Ezekiel Escura, he seemed to think it was just wonderful. Things are really in good shape.
Well, again, I haven't been there for 6 years. They now have, I know they have offices at a Hilanayari there near on the southeast side, and they have made it more difficult to enter through the original Highway 2 entrance going into Jacinto, and they didn't have to do much to discourage people from going into Guadalupe Victoria or the McDougal Crater side because that road was terrible. Beyond that, how much they actually have rangers and stuff, I don't know.
Yeah.
Bill Broyles would know, but I don't know.
So you don't know how staffed out they are?
No, I don't. At one point they had one staff.
Yeah.
And whether they have any real vigilancia or not, I don't know.
And Nature Conservancy what's their role then with?
I don't think they're involved in Pinacate. I don't know that.
Okay.
But I don't think they ever were very much involved in Pinacate. I think that that was other players.
Well, Susan Anderson's early.
She may have early, but they were moving more toward the Sierra de los Ajos.
Yeah.
And Sierra de Alamos was somebody else yet. I'm not sure who that was. But I may be wrong on that.
Right.
But I don't recall any big presence of the Nature Conservancy.
Well, they had been supporting the Ocaña effort in the early stages, which was all then the jumping point to Pinacate. And so Susan
they supported Ocaña. That's right. Yeah.
And all those young cadre of folks that were out there, and initially were supporting the staff there.
They even paid Ocaña's staff. Now, whose decision it was to go where, I don't know.
Yeah. Can we brainstorm a little bit about the kind of binational networks that exist? This is something I've been talking a little bit to Joe about. There are writers, there are anthropologists, and the question I have about writers is, they clearly have something to do with maintaining networks, because their work, their shared, take that Dry Borders book. That has all these people in it, and
yeah, but I don't think they were particularly working together.
Okay, that's my.
They're working. Yeah, I can only speak for myself. Working in Mexico is a very solitary. Writing in Mexico is a pretty solitary occupation. First of all, it's very big, and it's such an open field that people tend not to work together. Now, in the early '90s, we had the Rio Mayo plant project. And ultimately, I think we probably had 25, 30 people involved in that. But that was a one-time project to get as complete as possible a sweep of the flora in that region and the vegetation. And once that was done, so it was pretty well. When I took it over, it was pretty well funded through individual grants, and a lot of that went to the herbarium. But we did sponsor a lot of trips down there, and Paul Martin had sponsored even more trips before that. But that was really a one-shot deal toward one area. It was not ever viewed as being an ongoing networking type project. And finally, I just had to say, look, this is it. I can't spend the rest of my life doing it. We're going to do the book now.
Right.
And while I'm writing it, I shouldn't say when I'm writing it, while I'm putting it together, if anybody wants to bring more plants in, fine. But there's the point where I'm going to turn this over to the U of A press and no more plants after that time. So that with the end was we worked with some Mexican biologists, but not really many. I don't think they wanted to. I think that they viewed this as kind of a gringo imperialism. And again, there is a huge difference in the focus of Mexican and American researchers.
Okay.
Lack of field.
Yeah, there is not a strong commitment.
Are there Mexican researchers that you can think of that do the field? I mean, Alberto.
Oh yeah, there's Alberto and his fellow he doesn't get very well is Francisco Molino, who also is a plant guy. They do, and there are others, but
it's part of them.
You know, it's and I think Alberto would not disagree with me that field work itself is sort of viewed as something occasionally done to shore up research. While I would view it as really field work that gives research a good name. Right. And I think it's viewed, and I don't think Alberto would disagree with that, and I have the highest respect for him.
Yeah.
So that I don't think he would take exception to that.
Well,
but you know, in terms of your question, in terms of networking among writers, they're pretty few, or even researchers. The projects are far between, and seldom do their paths meet.
Is there another kind of network that doesn't depend upon lots of communication, but instead sort of a shared vision and appreciation of a place, so that while people may not talk together a lot, they see themselves as kindred spirits and part of the same group? Well,
the only group that I really know of is Bill Broyles, Friends of the Camino del Diablo. He has, every year he has this group of absolutely, just marvelous group of people who have some experience or other in the southwest part of Arizona, northwest part of Mexico. That's the common bond. And that, I think, is derived more from the mystique of the Pinacate, Organ Pipe, Cabeza Prieta, Sierra Rosario, all the dunes, and even the Colorado River. That's what pulls that group together. I don't think it's not a network committed to research. It's a network of people with a certain shared experience.
Right. Does it go beyond the shared experience to be the basis of action of any kind?
Well, that's what Richard and Bill drew on for Dry Borders.
Right.
But they drew on a bunch of individuals who had that rather than invoking any kind of network, so far as I know.
Right.
Do you see, if it's not individuals or institutions, do you see NGOs collaborating in a network?
There is one collaboration that's going on right now, and that is the Northern Jaguar Project. But that is specifically the Northern Jaguar Project in a network with, it's not Promotora, it's somebody else, I can't remember the name of it. And that has been very successful, but I think, again, that's because you have a charismatic mammal and a place that's devoid of people. And they're doing very well indeed. And I think they will be for quite some time. That's been a very successful project. But it's not per se networking. Mexico is providing increasingly the personnel and the researchers who have been trained in the methodology by American researchers, and they have terrific people. But the financing has come from the United States, buying ranches and buying the equipment, the jeeps, the trucks, the cameras, and without that, it would never have happened.
It's similar to the pronghorn, then.
More so. It's huge. Yeah, I mean, that's really it. They have something like, I think they have 80,000 acres that they own, and plus they have surrounding, it's kind of neat, the way they have brought surrounding ranchers in is they get permission from the ranchers to place trip cameras along places where wildlife would frequent. For every photo of a jaguar, the rancher gets 5,000 pesos. Even if it's the same one going back and forth. For every mountain lion, I guess they get 1,000 pesos. For every ocelot, 2,000 pesos. And for every bobcat, they get 500. And ranchers saying, hey, this is a good deal. It's been very, very successful.
Whose project is that? Maybe we ought to talk to somebody.
Diana Hadley's the person to talk to.
Diana's easy to talk to.
Yeah. I can't say that it was her idea.
But she'll tell me.
She really has been the inspiration. Of course, Peter has done huge amounts of research. Peter has had, I think, colon cancer. I think he's been very, very ill.
Yeah, I have heard that too.
But she's just done a tremendous job on it. We filmed 2 for a few days down there, and it's tremendous. But once again, it doesn't quite fit into the idea of networking per se. It's a project that needed binational support, and that's where it came from. So.
At a U.S. push.
Yeah, it had a U.S. push and bugs.
Sexy species.
Yeah,
Well, there's the food this place is a generator of activities that are binational. They may not be.
Well, that's a problem.
It's not so important that from the perspective of this project, maybe what keeps these borderlands, whether or not there's binational or trinational collaboration.
Environmentally, I don't think there is. There is some, but it's very limited. Now, social networks, I'm not sure how those are. You're familiar with border links?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Border links. I don't know to what extent they are perpetuating, but they certainly have extensive, and I hope illegal contacts. I think the social contacts are probably far bigger.
Who does border links these days? My knowledge is 15 years old.
I don't know, but you can call Peggy Hutchison at Primavera and she'll know.
Okay,
who
great.
it is.
It's the sister. I think she's the head of it now.
Yeah. I had to be in touch with her once because I brought a kid up to get a hair lip operation, and she was wonderful. Got it arranged and took care of all that, but I can't remember what her name is. Yeah. Sorry, but we get old. You're getting old too.
Yeah. Oh, more.
And true. Let me just ask you a question about. You say they're not binational. So what does that mean? What would it have to be in your mind to be binational? If it's
to be binational, there would have to be some kind of equality of impulse coming from both sides.
Okay.
And there isn't.
Okay.
Now, I'll give you one sentence that I think gives you some insight. There is no word in Spanish for wilderness. Let me give you one other. The Sonoran, and I think probably the Mexican ideal for increasing the value of property is to have it desmontado, or limpio. That is, all vegetation removed. Mm-hmm. Without that vegetation removed, it is viewed as being worthless or of much lower value.
How about these environmental education efforts? SADO spends a lot of time with all these busloads of kids coming to...
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just not in a position to tell you what the big effect of that was. And I think that 20 years ago was probably had a greater influence than now, but I don't know that. Yeah. Again, Diana, or the Northern Jaguar Project, has really become intensely involved in education in Sawaripa schools in that area. Numerous people have become involved in saving in the whale education in like San Ignacio and in the fishing towns along the lagoons where the whales come. But beyond, again, those are charismatic species. General environmental education consists of zoos and looking at animals.
Okay. All right. Well, we got another question on our stuff that relates to institutions.
Uh-huh.
And just a little background, when I was at the Udall Center, I don't know how many hundreds of hours we spent trying to design a border institution for water management and other things, which ended up to be the BEC and the NADBank and the Council on Environmental Quality and all these things. And I don't know how much time Bill Broyles has spent putting pieces of land in reserves, right?
Yeah.
Which are another kind of an institution.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
the Sonoran Desert National Monument's his baby. So.
Exactly.
In the U.S.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in talking to some people, they say things like, it doesn't matter a bit what these institutions are like. It depends entirely on the people. And if these institutions are not funded, and they don't have any people, and there's no enforcement, it really doesn't matter. Other people say, these institutions are really important because they protect things in bad times. They provide, very importantly, a arena and a, what did she call it? A table where people can come to, an opening. All right. You want to weigh into this argument at all?
Well, I guess I would like not to believe the great man theory of history, but I increasingly feel that those organizations are only as good as the people in them, and it takes a person with unusual vision, energy, and integrity to do it. And the continuity is never guaranteed. Institutions remain, but their effectiveness can change quite rapidly.
Yeah. Yeah. Then let's.
So I'm inclined to say that it doesn't mean anywhere nearly as much as the institutional people would like to think that it means.
Okay.
But it probably means more than some of the other cynics would say. I'm only about 87% cynical on that.
Yeah. Well, I'm about with you.
Yeah.
Then let's talk a bit about these characteristics of people. Granted that this relationship is one-sided, still there are a cadre of people who move back and forth across the border, and we've got I think I sent you a list of names of people we're trying to interview. What are the kind of characteristics of such people? Is there any unifying characteristic? We've sort of established that they don't always talk to one another. They may think of themselves as...
My best analogy for that is not even analogy, but an example would be Seri traders.
Okay.
In say 1971, by that time, I would guess there were probably 6 or 7 of us who routinely went and spent time with the Seris. And I quit importing. I only imported for about 3 years, but my best friend continued through the 80s. Dave Burkhalter still does. Scott Ryerson and Dave Burkhalter work together. Whether Jim Lindell does, I don't know. And then others have moved around and gone on. Why we all did that, I think we actually got together at the museum 3 or 4 years ago to try to identify some old Seri carvings. They had Diana Ditterman had us look at these, and it was funny because we all thought we really knew, and almost none of us were correct on the identification. It was kind of fun. But we're strong individuals working apart on our own. But also, we were infected with Seris and their habitat. And that's what kept us going down there. I mean, they are infuriating people to work with. Drive you nuts. And you come back, you say, I'll never go down again until 10 minutes later and you're ready to go again. You know?
Yeah.
So that example, to me, shows that the people who really are have a long-term commitment, have it for some intensely personal reason, as I do. I don't know what it is, but I have just, since I was 10, I was crazy about Mexico. And I think you'll find that, look at Bowden. Why in the world does Bowden get himself into these sordid situations to write about and keep on doing it? There's a fascination. It's the other Well, if you look at the U.S.-Mexico border, I think that there is no place in the world where there is, at a border, there is such an astonishing and immediate change as between the U.S. and Mexico. Certainly between Russia and China, it's very, very different. But in Mexico, it's even more so.
So it's the contrast in part?
It's the contrast, and there's a mystique there that is kind of like a virus that once you get it, you can't get rid of it. I'm sorry?
And access, or at least up to.
Well, yeah, and it's fairly easy to do. And you get across the border, and you're in not only a different culture, but the land even tends to change. Yeah. Not instantly, but within 100 miles, you're in really a very different Sonoran Desert habitat than you are. Yeah, it is. So that affects so many people.
I really like the carving example because I've been trying to think of physical objects, that are related to people's relationships with things. And those carvings are very interesting because they certainly were a binational object. A lot of people bought them. Yeah. And felt.
And it was probably an 8-year phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And at the end of 8 years, Mexicans were taking over things. The market was to an extent flooded with them, and their mystique just plummeted. Yeah. Baskets continue, but that's only special collectors now are collecting baskets because they're so expensive.
Siri baskets.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
They're still uncommon.
Is Mahina and Barney still kicking around?
Yeah, I don't think Barney is doing any more training. I think he just got worn out.
Yeah.
Gosh, I haven't seen them for. I know that I did my field work in southern Sonora for a couple of my books, and one of the villages I worked in, Barney was well known, and there were a number of people there who were unequivocally stated that Barney provided them with a living.
Yeah.
He did just huge amounts of tireless importing and encouraging people. The one guy who he encouraged now makes masks and is celebrated, won a huge national prize. And he recognized that Barney was the one that got him started. But Barney's not doing that now, and how much, I don't think there's anybody else will be able to take Barney's place.
It's interesting, though, you're mentioning a lot of things that are related to the arts, folklore, folk culture, artisanias, but that's been a powerful draw to the border into Mexico.
Oh yeah, Mata Ortiz has been a huge
that's
draw.
True.
And it has transformed, for better or for worse, Mata Ortiz from a sleepy village into a center of international currency. I mean, they now take their vacations in Las Vegas in Mata Ortiz. They all have big vehicles. It's become an extremely affluent town, and also full of drugs and murders.
So art doesn't keep that at bay.
No, doesn't at all.
Yeah.
You might talk to Jim Hills.
I was going to ask, is he's still?
Yeah, you call him. 318-1281. Jim and I met in 1955 at Prescott, and have been very close friends ever since. But his perspective is very different, and he's utterly fearless to give you an outrageous interpretation, which is terrific. He'll say things that, and he's got a lot of basis for doing it. He has not spent as much time in general in Mexico as I have, but he certainly knows much more than I do the aspects of trade, because he's gone all over Mexico, importing and establishing quite a business, and being very, very successful at it. So he knows that aspect infinitely better than I ever will.
Right. Well, it's certainly
he's
a
very,
network.
very good at what he does.
Yeah.
The trading certainly is a network, and traders know each other.
Right.
But that's an economic tie, see, and that's their trading information. Yeah.
But it's also an aesthetic tie, because
once again, it's based upon a mystique of folk production of arts, that not merely because they are in themselves aesthetically desirable, but because they come from a people whose roots are ancient and located in one place, rather than being a part of a mainstream culture and talent. That makes a huge difference.
But and many of them had or have had conservation motivations.
Who'd you have in mind?
Well, I was just thinking about the ironwood
Series had no conservation ethic whatsoever.
No, but the motivation for working with that, wasn't a lot of it based on conservation? Wanting to stamp the Seri carvings so that it made them specifically unique instead of any schlock person can go and...
Yeah, but I think that was a very small movement
that didn't...
The only way they could do it, make theirs distinguishable, was by stamping their initials on it, and anybody can do that. So, but usually most of us who are traders could distinguish. But there's some pretty, I mean, Seris themselves would go to Mexicans in Quito Bay and buy rough carvings and finish them themselves and sell them as Seri carvings. So I don't think that was a real authentic movement.
Okay.
Well, how are we doing?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So the networking, I think, is confined mostly to traders, and maybe drug traders too. I'm sure they have powerful networks, right?
Yeah.